The email arrived at 7:12 a.m., and by the time Daniel Harper finished reading it, his hands were shaking. After 12 years of loyal service, the subject line, urgent. Executive review meeting felt heavier than it should have. Outside his apartment in Chicago, the city was already alive, traffic humming like nothing in the world was about to break apart. Daniel adjusted his tie, took a slow breath, and told himself this was just another workday. He had no idea it would be. The last morning he walked into the company as an employee, Daniel had given the company his best years. He had joined fresh out of college, believing hard work and honesty could build a stable life. Over time, he became known as dependable, the man who fixed problems quietly and never took credit. He missed family trips, skipped celebrations, and answered late-night calls because he believed loyalty mattered. The office had become his second home, and his boss, Richard Cole, often praised him as irreplaceable. That word echoed in Daniel's mind as he stepped into the elevator, unaware of how quickly it would lose its meaning. The meeting room felt colder than usual. Richard sat at the head of the table, calm and confident, as if this were a casual conversation. Without much small talk, he slid a thin folder across the table. Daniel opened it and felt his chest tighten. The pages showed altered financial records, numbers shifted, losses hidden, timelines adjusted to make the company look stronger than it was. It wasn't complicated, and that made it worse. The message was clear: sign off, approve it, and move on. Richard leaned forward and spoke in a relaxed tone. He said this was standard practice, nothing serious, just a way to smooth things over before an upcoming audit. He reminded Daniel of the company's reputation, the jobs at stake, and the years Daniel had already invested. It wasn't a threat, but it wasn't a request either. It was an expectation. Daniel felt a sharp pull inside him. He thought about the trust clients placed in him, the rules he had followed for years, and the kind of man he wanted to be. His voice was steady when he said he couldn't do it. He explained that the numbers were wrong and signing them would mean lying. The room went quiet. Richard's expression changed, not angry, just disappointed, as if Daniel had broken an unspoken agreement. Richard reminded him how long they had worked together. He said everyone bends the rules sometimes, and that refusing would hurt more people than it helped. Daniel listened, but his answer didn't change. Closed the folder and pushed it back across the table. He said no again, clearly and calmly. For a moment, Richard said nothing. Then he nodded slowly and told Daniel to think about it. The meeting ended without a clear conclusion. But Daniel walked out knowing something had shifted. Over the next few days, the office felt different. Conversations stopped when Daniel walked by. Emails went unanswered. Meetings he usually attended were canceled without explanation. The silence spoke louder than any argument. On the third day, Human Resources asked him to come in. The tone was polite, professional, and distant. They talked about loss of alignment and company direction. No one mentioned the folder. No one mentioned the numbers. They handed him paperwork and asked for his access badge. 12 years ended. In under 20 minutes, when Daniel stepped outside, the winter air hit his face, sharp and real. People rushed past him, laughing, talking, living their normal lives. He stood there, holding a cardboard box with his desk items, feeling like time had split in two before and after. His phone buzzed. It was a message from Emily Ross. Emily had joined the company months earlier as a communications consultant. She was thoughtful, observant, and kind in a quiet way. Their connection had grown naturally, shared coffee breaks, small talks that turned into long conversations. Nothing rushed, nothing complicated. Daniel liked her because she felt safe, honest, and real. He had been planning to ask her out properly, once work settled down. Her message was simple. "Are you okay? You sounded off earlier." Daniel stared at the screen, unsure how to explain that the life he had built so carefully had just collapsed. He typed and deleted several replies before finally putting the phone away. He wasn't ready to speak yet. As he walked home, Daniel replayed the meeting in his mind. He wondered if he should have handled it differently, if staying silent would have been easier. But every time doubt crept in, the same truth followed. Signing that paper would have crossed a line he couldn't uncross. He would have carried that decision forever. That night, alone in his apartment, Daniel finally replied to Emily. He told her he had been let go and didn't want to worry her earlier. Her response came fast. She said she was there if he needed anything, no questions asked. Her words didn't fix his situation, but they softened the weight pressing on his chest. Meanwhile, inside the company, Richard Cole moved on quickly. Meetings continued. Numbers were approved. Daniel's name was quietly removed from systems and email lists. The official story was simple and clean, but the truth stayed hidden, buried in spreadsheets and silence, as Daniel lay awake staring at the ceiling. Fear mixed with a strange sense of relief. He didn't know what came next. He didn't know how he would pay his bills or explain this gap in his career. But deep down, he knew one thing clearly. He had kept his integrity. And though it had cost him everything he thought was secure, it had also set him on a path he couldn't yet see, somewhere between uncertainty and hope. Daniel closed his eyes, unaware that this ending was only the beginning. Daniel Harper didn't know how to start over, but he knew he had to. The morning after he was fired, Chicago's streets were buzzing with people rushing to jobs, to meetings, to lives that hadn't been appended overnight. Daniel walked past the familiar coffee shops, the office buildings, the small park where he used to eat lunch. Everything was the same, yet everything felt different. 12 years of routine had vanished in 15 minutes, and the silence left behind was deafening. He held his phone in his hand, Emily's message glowing on the screen. "I'm here. Don't face this alone." He had always liked her quiet strength, but now, more than ever, he realized he needed someone who wouldn't just offer words, but presence. That evening, he texted her back and agreed to meet at the cafe near the river. When he arrived, Emily was already there, her laptop closed. A warm smile on her face that didn't try to fix things, but just let him exist in his own chaos. He sat down, and for a long time, neither of them spoke. The city lights reflected off the river, and Daniel felt a strange mix of fear and relief. He began telling her everything: how Richard had pushed him, how the numbers had been falsified, how he refused to sign. He expected judgment, pity, maybe even advice to bend the rules for his own good. But Emily listened. She didn't interrupt. Oh, she didn't judge. She just held his gaze and let the truth land. When he finished, he felt the tension leave him in waves, though the weight of unemployment didn't disappear. Emily reached across the table and gently held his hand. "You did the right thing," she said softly, "even if it costs more than it should." That simple affirmation felt like a lifeline. Daniel realized that integrity didn't just define him professionally. It shaped the kind of life he wanted to live, the kind of person he wanted to be with. Emily's words reminded him that some losses weren't really losses. They were openings for something better. In the days that followed, Daniel felt the full impact of being unemployed. Rejections came quickly, applications that never received replies, interviews that ended with polite thanks but no offer. He had bills to pay, a small savings cushion that was dwindling, and a pride that bruised every time he thought about how easily he had been discarded. Yet even in those quiet, anxious nights, Emily stayed nearby. She would drop off meals, send encouraging messages, remind him of his strengths. She didn't make promises he couldn't keep, and she didn't try to fix his problems with quick solutions. Her presence alone made the struggle feel manageable. Then, unexpectedly, opportunities began to appear. A former client, one who had known Daniel's work ethic for years, called with a consulting question. A week later, another reached out with a referral. Word had started to travel quietly, not about his firing, but about his refusal to compromise his values. Soon, a small but respected ethical consulting firm in Toronto offered him an interview. They hadn't heard about his termination as a scandal. They had heard about a man who refused to bend, who maintained integrity even when it was costly. Daniel traveled to Toronto, nervous but cautiously optimistic. The office was smaller than his previous workplace, but it felt genuine. The people there were professional yet approachable, and they spoke openly about values, responsibility, and trust, things that had become more than abstract words for Daniel. During the interview, they asked about his work history, challenges he had faced, and how he handled difficult decisions. Daniel spoke honestly, without embellishment, explaining the situation with Richard Cole in a calm, matter-of-fact way. The interviewers nodded, impressed not by the controversy, but by his steadfastness. A few days later, he received the offer. The salary wasn't extravagant, but it was fair, and more importantly, it aligned with his principles. For the first time since he had been fired, Daniel felt a sense of stability returning. He called Emily immediately, and when she heard the news, she cheered quietly, her excitement tempered by warmth. That evening, they celebrated simply coffee and a walk along the waterfront, laughing about the smallest things, relieved that the world was tilting back toward balance. Months passed, and Daniel settled into his new role. The work was challenging, fulfilling, and aligned with his values. He realized that the fear he had felt after losing his job had been necessary, forced him to confront who he truly was and what he truly wanted. Emily continued to be a quiet, steady presence, attending small company events with him, sharing meals, and offering comfort without overstepping. Their bond deepened naturally, built on trust, respect, and mutual admiration. Daniel began to see a future he had not allowed himself to imagine before, a life where honesty, love, and work could coexist without compromise. One evening, as they stood by the office window overlooking the city lights, Daniel felt a wave of gratitude. He had been afraid that integrity would cost him everything, but instead it had led him to a life that felt whole and real. Emily leaned her head on his shoulder, and he realized that love, like trust, required patience and honesty. No shortcuts, no compromises. He had thought he lost everything when he walked out of his old office building, but in truth, he had gained the chance to build something lasting. In the distance, Chicago's skyline still shone brightly. But Daniel now felt that the lights of his own life, Toronto, Emily, and the work that mattered were the ones guiding him forward. He understood that Richard Cole's world would continue to move in shadows, but his own path would remain illuminated by choices he could live with. That clarity gave him a peace he hadn't known in years. As Daniel and Emily walked home that night, hand in hand, he realized that endings could be beginnings. Integrity might cost him a career, but it had earned him a love and a life worth holding. And in that quiet, unassuming way, he knew that some victories couldn't be measured in money, titles, or prestige. They were measured in courage, in honesty, and in the quiet moments of shared understanding with someone who truly mattered. The past no longer weighed him down. Each challenge, each rejection had prepared him for this moment. And as he glanced at Emily, smiling softly in the streetlight, he finally understood what it meant to truly start over. Not with fear, but with faith in himself and the love that had grown alongside his choices. The city felt different now, overwhelming but alive with possibility. And for the first time in months, Daniel Harper walked forward without hesitation, knowing that what he had refused to compromise for had led him exactly where he needed to be.